protecting athletes' physical and mental well-being. And it's the latest session that we've put on for the Premier Sports Network. For many of you joining us, and thanks very much for being on board, you'll be familiar with the extensive work that Premier Sports Network has done with clubs and sporting organisations in the subject of player care over the years. And many of you, we have probably crossed paths in live events that have been done over the years for Premier Sports Network. And hopefully soon in 2021, we'll be able to get back to doing those once again. But at the moment, it is the world of Zoom, and this will have to do. But one thing that I know for sure is, having done quite a few of these over the lockdown period and whilst we've been dealing with the pandemic, they have been really, really enlightening and maybe even more honest as well, because you've got the guests talking from their natural habitat as well. So I'm really looking forward to this one. And maybe in live events, we don't get an opportunity to reveal people from behind a curtain, which we can do on Zoom, which is maybe a little bit of a bonus. So we can give them a formal introduction and they can start their video as we do so. Let's introduce our first guest, and he is the Head of Medical Services for West Ham United, and that is Richard Collinge, who joins us now. Richard. And here he is.
Hi, Adam. Hi, everybody.
Big reveal. Thank you, Richard. Our next guest is Nick Fenton-Wells, who is currently the team manager at Bristol Bears, of course, a former player as well. Nick, great to have you on board. Thank you. Good to have you on. Unmute, of course, Nick. Unmute.
Apologies. Thanks, Adam. Hi, everybody.
Good to have you with us. And last but not least is the current Director of Cricket at Warwickshire County Cricket Club, former England coach as well, Paul Farbrace. Paul, how are you?
Good, thank you, Adam. How are you?
Very well, very well. That is your official title, isn't it? Director of Cricket. Or have you got a more fancy title?
It's actually just changed from sporting director to Director of Cricket, which sits much better in the world of cricket, I've got to say.
Okay, good. Right. Well, gents, obviously you've got a wide array of experiences on dealing with players, playing yourself, some of you, but also, dealing with staff and dealing with colleagues as well during a very difficult time. Let's deal with the here and now and dealing with the physical, mental well-being of players. Let's start with you, Paul. How have you managed to keep the players motivated during a very difficult period of time when a lot of it, you wouldn't have had much face-to-face contact, I guess? Absolutely.
And it was, I think we had concerns that our players have spent an awful long time preparing for the season. So, we have that unique 5-6 months indoor period for our players, and then they start their season early April, play through obviously to the end of September. We were trying to keep our players ready to start the season at the drop of a hat, really. And I think we went through a stage of thinking we weren't going to play any cricket, and then very quickly things changed mid-summer. We managed to get them in full-time from the 1st of July and ready to start on the 1st of August. So we had a very condensed period to play our season, August and September. We finished then third week of September, and we're back into that winter period. So our concern is an awful lot of time training and not enough time playing. That the one bonus has been actually that the players have proved that they're actually quite self-sufficient and they're very good at looking after themselves away from us. So our S&C perhaps might be a little bit disappointed on one hand. On the other hand, he's actually quite pleased that his words have got through and the players have actually maintained their levels of fitness and worked very hard on their own, which has been really encouraging.
Yeah, that is. Nick, I saw you sort of smirk at that point that, players, sportsmen and women can be self-sufficient. It's a bit of a revelation. Did you have that? Did you have that experience? Obviously, you've transitioned very recently from being a player to being team manager. Maybe you can outline exactly what your role is now and your responsibilities.
Yeah, so pretty much day-to-day planning for the weekend to make sure that we have every player who's fit and available, registered and able to take the field. That's probably my primary role. And then in and around that, a lot of logistic management and operations around the place, and just making sure that things are able to function efficiently and properly on a day-to-day basis. Yeah, it is funny. That self-sufficient thing, it seems, fortunately, I wasn't a player during the lockdown period and retired before then, but I hope that prior to that, I wasn't one of those ones who continually needed help in getting things done and completed, and was able to do things for myself. I don't know if that's the case, because I'm pretty sure I was one of those annoying ones who had to ask continual questions and had to have every small detail outlined for me. But it does go to show, as Paul mentioned, that players are incredibly self-sufficient, and that they're capable of doing a lot more than they actually give themselves credit for. I think it's one of those things where, when they're put in a difficult situation, they actually know very well how to cope. And they've just proved that to us too. So,
yeah, I mean, Richard, on that point, I mean, we'll dig into sort of your various experiences and sort of very difficult experiences that you've had of late at West Ham in particular in a moment's time. But just in general terms, how have you felt the players, the footballers, because, different sports, different types of people play different sports, how footballers in general dealt with a very challenging period?
Yeah, sure, Adam. I mean, I would say that we've used, as we were alluding to there, this has been a time of adversity, and we've used it and flipped it around into a positive environment, really, Adam. So yeah, we've kind of pressed the reset button, I think would be the best terminology I could use. And what I mean by that was we were under the guidelines, obviously the Premier League guidelines, Public Health England and government guidelines. So we had to adhere to those, and we still are doing so now. So that started with stringent swab tests twice a week initially. We're now down to once a week. We still have the social distancing here at the training ground. But one area that was really pertinent for myself was the hands-on treatment time. So we were restricted to 15-minute treatment times, and we're wearing all the PPE. So we were face masks, aprons, gloves. If we were doing a procedure that was high risk, we had to wear a visor as well, whether that was pitch side or here at the training ground. So you've got to imagine that we had players that were used to having 45 minutes, an hour, sometimes longer soft tissue treatment, massage each day. And certainly when we went on the road, we were taking our, obviously, mobile medical clinic and staff with us. So we had to reframe with the players to say, look, we're limited to 15-minute treatment time. And the benchmark there, Adam, is very much about, if I were to test positive, I would put that player into an isolation period and vice versa. So we had to mitigate that risk. So yeah, we had to somehow turn that around, and what we did was make the players more self-sufficient, as the guys said earlier. So maybe they spent more time in the gym, which was kind of music to the ears of our fitness staff. And we used strategies such as foam rolling, myofascial release work, and we focused more so on the recovery aspect. So that was kind of a big area for us as a club to reframe the player's psychology, and it's worked well for us.
It's an interesting point you raise, and obviously there's been a lot of attention on football in particular, due to it being a very condensed season, especially, or more so in the EFL, let's say, with the amount of games. Do you think that the fact that there has been seemingly quite a lot more injuries, is that down to the fact that you haven't had the opportunity to spend as much time as you would maybe like doing things like massages and things like that?
Sure. I mean, certainly in-house, Adam, to be honest, we've kind of benefited positively, really. We were having a tough time pre-lockdown, being honest about it. We're down near the bottom of the table. That lockdown period seemed to go on forever in football. And we got to the stage where, as was publicised, we're bringing the players in one player at a time. And we were doing the longest days ever, starting, at silly o'clock in the morning, going all the way through. But that's what we had to do. You've got to imagine the demographic and the geography of where we're at here in London. So we have players that live in flats in Canary Wharf, so they didn't have any outside space to work in. So yeah, we went through a process of the different protocols of the Premier League, progressing through. I believe we made the players more robust and more resilient, and I mean that from a physical and a psychological perspective. And we treated the 9 games that we were told had to be completed. There are obviously big financial reasons for that, in terms of the TV deals, etc. But we treated that as kind of a cup mentality, a tournament mentality. And the players adapted well to that, applied themselves well to that regime. And then, of course, Adam, we went into a very short off-season, and footballers and football staff are creatures of habit. They're kind of used to a set period as an off-season, And I was chatting only at lunchtime to one of our players about this. And looking back, for where we come from in March, it's very hard to see, where the lines have been blurred very much from one season into the next. And it feels like this season is a continuation from last season, Adam. And yeah, of course, I'm not sat here as I'm sure the staff would be at Liverpool and Manchester City, who are playing European football and travelling. And yes, we have international level players, but I think the injury rates are higher purely because there's not been much of an off season, and players are pretty much going straight through from one season to the next.
Okay, Paul, I wanted to come back to you. It's interesting that there seemingly has been some positives out of this, and making players more self-sufficient, but also maybe having an opportunity to discuss more openly, things like mental health, etc. Maybe that's come out of it because we've had to focus on not just the sport, not just getting out on the green stuff. So, what other techniques have you been able to use in these sort of unique circumstances to maybe get some unique results?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And I think one of the things that, and obviously listening to Richard there, we knew that we weren't going to be going down the realms of being able to test. That was at international level with cricket, county cricket. We didn't have the resource for that. So one of the things that we'd already set up a wellbeing group. And when I worked with the England cricket team and we travelled, obviously, we'd be away 310 nights in a hotel a year, be it home tours, away tours. So we had a wellbeing group, which was myself, team masseuse at the time, and whoever the doctor was for the series. And that's something that I implemented here when I first came to Warwickshire 19 months ago. And so I had someone from the PCA, our PDWM, who looks after our player welfare from the PCA, Players Association, our physio, myself, one of our coaches, and our doctor. And we started having pretty regular chats about all of our players and staff to make sure we had a good handle on them. And we were looking for anything that might throw them off course or alert us to anything. And we had basically a tiered system so that the doctor was the only one that knew what the problem was, if there was a problem, and the rest of us, it scaled down to know that we had to look out for people. And that worked really, really well for us. But one of our other positives that came out of obviously lockdown was there was a lot of people available and happy to chat. And we managed to tap into a lot of people, and we were very lucky that we got Steve Bruce, Dean Smith on calls with all of our players. Eddie Jones came on whilst he was studying in Japan, and we managed through contacts to get people to come on and talk for an hour about their sport and their setup. And at the time, Dean Smith talked to us a lot about, it was interesting, Richard mentioned about where they were at the start of lockdown, and Dean talked about his players and how he'd worked with them over Zoom, and they talked a lot about set pieces and not conceding goals or whatever. And obviously in the end, that contributed massively to them staying in the Premier League, along with a little bit of good fortune of one that bounced out the stanchion and back out. But they had that little bit of good fortune. But it was really good because we were able to tap into those high quality people, and we had people come on week after week, share their experiences, share their thoughts, talk about what they were doing during lockdown. And it helped all of our players, and it helped them to realize that, everybody was in the same boat. And as Richard said, it's an opportunity to perhaps reset, an opportunity to actually look at what you can take out of it. And rather than worrying about what can go wrong, it's a brilliant opportunity to think about what can go right. And that's a really important mindset for any sportsman or woman, whatever sport they're in. So, we found a lot of really good positives in that period, and people that were happy to share their experiences, which at other times they're too busy and you're never going to get them to be involved.
Nick, is that something that manifested itself in your world as well, that there was more opportunity to just simply sit down and not face to face, obviously, but across a Zoom and just talk and open up channels of communication to the players?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was one of the things was that's been alluded to is that we actually didn't know exactly how long this was going to last for, how long the lockdown period was going to last for. So we had a rough idea of how long it could go on for, and that allowed us to plan meetings and Zoom calls and quizzes and things like that we wouldn't usually do in the environment. So we actually spent a lot more time as a group socially, even though we're distanced, using relevant technology to interact with one another and just sort of, create those connections between people who may not otherwise connect on a daily basis. So, you'd have staff members phoning players and players phoning staff members for a chat just to catch up. And that almost sort of happened authentically, so to speak, because, we knew that, a lot of people were spending a lot more time on their own. And when we came together as a group, you could identify people who may be living on their own, who might not be able, have family close by, or create a bubble that they could spend time with others. So it was about just picking up the phone and having conversations with people around how they're feeling, how they're getting on with the training that had been set for them. And then we looked at trying to create some more enjoyable content for people to watch. So we had skills challenges. I mentioned quizzes. We'd just have a weekly staff and squad get together and catch up on Zoom, where we'd chat about, it might be identifying good books that someone's read, or watching different series, or whether it be documentaries, or just something that was enjoyable to watch. So there was a lot of shared information that was not necessarily rugby related, which I think really strengthened the relationships within the squad. And it certainly feels like the squad's come back, and the staff, with a sort of an even increased bond, so to speak, in that the glue seems to have just strengthened the people within the organization, which has been fantastic.
Just following up on that, I mean, it's interesting. Obviously, that the aim was to bring everyone together. But in your experience, and I'm not expecting you to name names of individuals or anything like that, but was there ever an occasion, especially with players that didn't necessarily have wives or girlfriends or partners or whatever, that were alone, where you just thought, yeah, they're not joining in, or they look like they might need a call by themselves, like maybe a bit of extra attention? Did that manifest itself?
Yeah, absolutely. There were actually a few stories that got shared amongst the squad, which were, people just sharing stories about their lockdown period. And there were a number of players who would literally reach out to staff members, knowing full well that those staff members didn't have family or girlfriends nearby, or anybody that they were living with. And that can become quite lonely, So it was so great to hear that there were people within the organisation, not just players, but those were the examples that sort of came to the surface. But people just picking up the phone. I mean, I for one had a phone call from a staff member, and he literally called me 99 times out of 100. Had it not been lockdown, he would have called me about rugby-related things. And he just picked up the phone, gave me a call, and just wanted to check in and see how I was doing, and it had nothing to do with rugby. And it made me feel, personally, sort of really valued as a member of the squad. And I know how important that would have been to the other staff members, the other players that people are getting in contact with, because it just shows that there's genuine love within the squad. And that's everything that Pat's tried to create. That's the culture. It's about love and the sacrifice of oneself for another, which is what we try and do here. And it may seem weird in a macho environment that we use the word love, but it's exactly that. That's what it is. We're continually going out of our way to make sure that everybody is capable of doing their jobs to the best of their ability.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and that's what it is. But when we're talking about mental well-being, it's trying to break down the barriers and the norms, I suppose, and cutting through that and getting to the heart of the matter. Richard, from your point of view, I wanted to deal with the sort of very public situation that you had to deal with at the club when it was David Moyes, 2 other players had positive tests. Just first, I mean, how did that actually unfold, and then how did you then have to deal with it? Because I mean, people were picturing almost, and you'll be able to tell me if this is true, that you almost set up a laptop in the middle of the dressing room with David Moyes' head popping up, like it was something out of Red Dwarf or something. Just tell me how it all played out.
Yeah, it was an unusual situation, Adam. Let's put it that way. The company contracted Prenetics to provide the Premier League tests. Basically, they have a 48-hour turnaround window for the test results. Depending on if it's a home or away game, we have a certain number of tests. But on that evening, we were playing Charlton, I think it was, and we played Hull in the previous round. And obviously, we were playing teams from the EFL that had not been tested. So there was a lot of media speculation at the time. I think Tottenham were playing Leyton Orient, and I think Tottenham had paid for Leyton Orient to have their tests, and they then returned a silly number of positive tests, Leyton Orient, that shut them down for a period of time. So there was a whole political background to what was going on. But yeah, kind of intrinsic to us here at West Ham. We had the test results back on the day of the game. And that was within the 48-hour window that Prenetics had kind of allowed, which was fine. But it was just that nightmare kind of Swiss cheese effect, where I say all the kind of the holes in the Swiss cheese align, and it affected our preparation for the game severely. So obviously the manager and 2 of our starting 11 tested positive. What then happened after that was a whole kind of action plan of events that we planned and prepared for in terms of isolating those individuals who didn't have any symptoms at that moment in time. But I think the frequency of nature of testing meant that we'd caught things early, which is obviously why we'd done these tests in the first place. So we were then obviously meeting with Hull City to decide whether the game was going to go ahead. We met with the officials and the EFL officials who were on site that evening, and it was deemed that the game was safe to go ahead. It was just one of those scenarios that luckily we'd prepared for. We caught things early, and we had isolated, said members of staff and players, and that helped us to manage their symptoms moving forwards. But ultimately, we're talking a lot about mental health and psychology here. You've got to then, you've got to explain to those people what that positive test means, because they're in front of me saying, well, hang on, Rich, I feel absolutely fine here. Why are you sending me away from the stadium? Why are you sending me home? Why am I being isolated? Because they wanted to prepare for the game that was in front of them. We had to send them home, isolate them. A whole process of retesting then occurred after that, Adam. That's become the new norm now. We're aware that we have to do the tests, and that's to protect public health, and we follow the same guidelines in football as we would do if that was a test of somebody outside of football.
It's obviously, it was a very public thing as well, and I know some clubs, I suppose it was unavoidable when you've got a manager that goes down with a positive test. You're almost obliged to announce that it is the manager. You have to. And then if there are a couple of other ones, then it's almost like, well, yes, those players have gone down with it as well. I know some clubs have sort of not disclosed things because ultimately it's a very private matter, and there might be different scales to which players are affected by it, or they're worried about it, or things like that. So how that decision-making process, I suppose, is very interesting for the attendees that are watching as well, maybe working for different football clubs or sports organizations, different sports. How do you go through that process as well, whereby you can almost say to the player, the manager, the staff member, or whatever, we don't have to announce this, but if you want us to, we will.
Yeah, it's a great point, because it ultimately comes down to confidentiality, because those 3 positive tests are, yes, they're players within the club and obviously the manager. It's patient confidentiality. It's kind of the bread and butter of what we're all about in terms of medical ethics. So going back to where we were a couple of minutes back, Adam, yes, we prepared for this. The manager said, right, if he were to get isolated, then Alan Irvine, the assistant manager, were to take over. If likewise I got a positive test, Adam, who would step into my shoes? So we almost had a staffing team A and a staffing team B, if that makes sense, and possibly even a team C, should it be the real worst case scenario. So we'd had a contingency plan in place, to be clear on that. We then started a situation whereby, even the following day, we had a training group, we had a recovery group. The manager was doing his meetings as we are doing now, in terms of Zooms. So he was feeding back to the group what he saw. And I think even eyeballing the games from a different perspective. What I mean by that is, obviously we have cameras here at the training ground, so he could watch all the training sessions, he could watch the gym sessions. We were doing our kind of medical and coaching staff meeting kind of remotely as well at that moment in time. And obviously he was watching games at home in his flat in London when he was on the phone, I think, to Stuart Pearce most of the time to kind of give some direction as well. So yeah, the kind of the wonders of IT and technology allowed him to still do his job remotely. And yeah, he still had a heavy input to what was going on. I think we played Leicester and Wolves in that time. And yeah, he was still heavily involved in what was going on. In the meantime, we were trying to keep him fit and healthy. And like we'd done with the players, we were, we were sending out food bundles, nutritional packs. We were advising about sleep. We were looking at kind of supplementation with vitamins, and he was obviously undergoing regular tests like the other two players were. So again, the protocols didn't change whether it was the manager or the players that tested positive. But yeah, we wanted to make sure that the sensitivity of the information, we as a club, were respectful of the individual. And in that scenario, the manager and the players were happy that their names were announced. But I think from a Premier League perspective, they will say there have been 14 tests or 10 tests positive in the last test period. But our decision was, with the blessing of those individuals, that they were happy for it to be public knowledge.
It is really an amazing experience when you're talking about the logistics of, snapping into action, dealing with, protocols to deal with a pandemic and all this sort of stuff. And back in February, no one would have imagined that anyone would be having to deal with these sort of things. So, it's to everyone's credit that everyone's been able to adapt so quickly, especially within sport, to try and keep the show on the road. Paul, from your point of view, I mean, how difficult has it been for you to sort of balance everything out when you're also thinking, on a sporting level, what we want to be competitive, we want the best players, but having to logistically deal with all of this must have been very, very difficult indeed.
Yeah, it was. And I think we were very lucky, I guess, in cricket that cricket realised we weren't going to be able to play a full season, and we were going to have to adopt some sort of policy whereby we got what we could get in. And I think the ECB were outstanding as a governing body right from the start. And they actually made sure that we were well equipped, we were kept up to date with the latest thinking, that the medics centrally were keeping each county up to speed as well. And we were very fortunate here that we've got somebody who, on the ground, as our stadium manager, took on the role of looking after the COVID planning and everything else that went with it. So we were in a good position, but there was always that unknown. I guess that was the tricky bit. But we were very fortunate that we got our fixtures in. We ended up playing a completely different format. So we played our T20 format, which went through to the usual finals day, although it went into October. But for county championship cricket, we played this Bob Willis Trophy tournament rather than the usual tournament. So we still got cricket in. It meant that, as I say, it was very condensed, but at least it gave the players an outlet, because I think our biggest concern was that we were actually going to train for a summer and then had no cricket whatsoever. And then how do you deal with that mental aspect of building performers up to perform, to play, and then nothing happens and you've got a complete, really long period of time where you've got no sport whatsoever. So, we were very fortunate that we got cricket in. And as I say, we were very fortunate the governing body worked very closely with all the counties to make sure that we actually had some cricket, and it actually happened. But, as Richard's talking about there, having your plans in place and your key personnel. I mean, it seemed like every week our meetings were changing. 1 week it was going to be good. We were on and we were ready and we were geared up, and then it would be like, no, it's not going to happen. And then, as I say, all of a sudden in the world of cricket, things changed so quickly. And I think through June, all of a sudden, we all went from thinking we had no chance, we were just going to be watching England playing matches on television, to suddenly, actually, we have got a chance here. We got our players back in, and the boost that it gave them was incredible. It really was a fantastic boost for them, except for the one or two that, perhaps didn't get a game because we didn't have enough fixtures to play everybody.
Nick, from your point of view, obviously having to oversee these sort of logistical challenges as well, how difficult was it for you, sort of in a relatively new role as well? We talk about the players all the time and dealing with them, but from your point of view, how difficult was that to deal with such a big issue so soon?
It wasn't something that I was predicting, I'll be honest with you, when I started the role. But it was, coming into the role, I had a lot of great support from people who worked with the previous team managers, CEO, director of rugby. But to be honest, that just generally the communication amongst all the staff is world class. It's been brilliant. So I think that helped me a lot along the way in terms of knowing exactly what I needed to do and what they needed from me in order for them to do their job. So it definitely threw up a level of challenges, specifically coming back from the lockdown and going into much shorter and condensed second half of the season, where we were playing, 3 games in a week. That made it really challenging.
How did you deal with that? Because I know football and cricket is hardcore, but the physical exertion in rugby is next level, isn't it? So sorry, carry on. I mean, that must have been so.
Absolutely. Well, we're fortunate in that, and I genuinely mean this, in that we have a medical department and strength and conditioning department, which are, I would say, probably best in their respective environments, or in their, amongst their peers. They are brilliant. And when you have a coaching staff who appreciate and understand the level of work that these guys are putting in to ensure that we can get the best possible 15 or 23 out every weekend, that synergy amongst coaches, S&C and medical is so crucial, especially when you condense the season down like that, because at the end of it, it's the knock-on effect that happens when you have a short turnaround going into, another full season, which we had 3 weeks off at absolute most. In fact, we had 2.5 weeks off before we came back in. So fundamentally, it was crucial that we all understood exactly what we needed to do in order to keep players fit, how to manage their load in terms of training, gym, from a medical perspective, and then what that looked like from stress management perspective. How burnt out were these guys going to get if they'll continue to go on a season like this for that amount of time, knowing that at the back end of the season they wouldn't have very much time off. So it was, kudos to our coaching staff and our medical team and our S&C team for the level of understanding that they had, and that had a knock-on effect on the rest of it, because these boys all have media commitments. So our media staff were, exceptional with planning in time for guys to get all their media requirements done before the start of the new season without hampering them too much by putting, too much more stress on them in terms of activities that were needed to be completed. So I think at the end of it, the communication amongst all staff was just incredible, and it needed to go up another level in order for us to be able to manage the squad and make sure that they were fit and healthy and ready to start this 2021 season, hitting the ground running.
Nick obviously mentioning there about the physical exertion in rugby. One of the changes that was made in football, Richard, was prior to the start of this season, in Project Restart, was bringing in 5 substitutions. Just from your experience, and I imagine there are various conversations that you will have with the manager that are quite contentious in terms of no, I really need him, but you have to say, well, no, you can't have him. I mean, in terms of how much of a difference being able to rotate within games and have 5 substitutions made, and then why it became such a big topic this season. What's your stance on it and the benefits of it?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at those 9 games post-lockdown, Adam, if you look at, I think, the intensity of the games, obviously there were no spectators in the stadium, and we're luckily just starting to get a few back now. But our own data, we didn't notice any real deficit in terms of the high intensity running or the distances covered by the players within that period of time. And also remember, we had the drinks breaks halfway through each half as well, Adam. So there were different factors at play there. I would say, our own philosophy at that moment in time was, even when we had 5 subs, we probably didn't use all 5 subs, and I think that's a lot of the debate now. And again, I think the Guardiolas and Jurgen Klopp are obviously pushing hard for the return of the 5 subs now, and maybe they're in a slightly more luxurious position in terms of the depth in their squad than say ourselves. Or I know Chris Wilder at Sheffield United has kind of alluded to this an awful lot recently, but. I'd say, we generally didn't use the 5 subs. Obviously, when it was a 3-game week, then I think it does give you more scope to rotate and keep some freshness in the squad. Again, looking at the data since the season's recommenced, I'd say availability-wise, we've done really well here at West Ham. We're really proud of that. And I still don't think we'd probably be using 5 subs given the opportunity now, Adam. But we're coming into a Christmas schedule. Things get busier for us now. The manager might want to rotate the squad more so. Yeah, I think at this moment in time, as a club, yeah, the 3 subs is sufficient for where we're at. But other clubs may have a different philosophy based on their own, kind of agendas, and also making sure they've got freshness in the legs for European games and the travel that's involved with that.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I suppose I'm sure it'll rumble on, and it will probably rear its head when managers want something to deflect on.
I mean, and the other thing to add into that is, what starts to happen, obviously, and obviously with Nick's kind of experience here in rugby, what happens with concussion. That's the big topic at the minute. Whether one of those subs might be allocated as a concussion sub, that's maybe a slightly different angle of the conversation here. But could that be an avenue that the Premier League and the EFL explore as well?
It was great to see, Richard. It was great to see parts of cricket kicking into the Premier League and you having drinks breaks.
Yes.
The amount of stick we get in cricket for the game stopping while the lads have a banana or a drink for people that go to their first game ever. So to see drinks breaks kicking into football was fantastic.
Absolutely.
Nick, from your go on, sorry, Richard, go on.
No, sorry. And just on a serious note, obviously you got to remember the lockdown period. We were playing in some pretty high temperatures and humidities as well, and the very nature of our stadium at the Olympic Bowl there, it really did retain the heat and the humidity. So the drinks breaks were actually, from a kind of health perspective, we felt were really essential at that moment in time. Moving into the winter months, the players probably don't see the reason why that should be happening. But yeah, back in the summer months, and that's not normally a time when we are playing Premier League football. Obviously, that was a huge factor for us to consider.
Yeah.
I still don't think Paul's going to give you much sympathy, having toured in
I don't think so.
Sri Lanka and
No, I was going to say, fielding in Sri Lanka for 6 hours, and when the bowlers are going back after tea, and you're stood there with a cold drink in your shorts, saying, "Come on, lads, put a bit more in for us." 2 hours to go. It's not normally a very good response, I can assure you.
I'm sure.
Nick, just to go back to obviously an issue that is developing, and I mean it's been an issue for a decent amount of time in football, but it's coming to fruition, and that's concussion and the impact on football players. Obviously, this has been dealt with ahead of time in rugby and dealt with in terms of concussion change substitutions and protocols and everything. You've almost been leading the way in that. How is it sort of seen within the game from management and from players at the moment in terms of their own mental well-being, in terms of thinking about this as a real problem for now, but also in the future?
Yeah, I think it's becoming such a big issue because we're seeing things that occur post concussions with the link between mental health and concussions and successive knocks to the head and things like that. So in terms of protocol, it is becoming, religious in the way that we follow it. It's, I would say that, the protocol is there for obvious reasons, but you really have to dig deep in to find out whether or not, and be rigorous with the way that you test players in terms of trying to rush them back or get them back from a concussive injury. So, again, it falls with the medical staff, and players have to be honest and open about, the symptoms that they're feeling, because that would be one of the issues that, you might come into work and not be feeling great and feel in a bit of a fog, and that's one of the tests they go through. But if you decide to circle that box and go, no, well, I actually feel fine, knowing that you don't feel fine, that's when the issues come. So, concussion is a massive deal, particularly in contact sports like we play in, and it, we had an incident last season where one of our players struggled, actually suffered from a really bad concussion, and had to retire from the game. And I think that as an example, unfortunately, really opens the eyes to players when it happens so close to home. And it's unfortunate that it had to happen so close to home for it to become a real issue. And I think that the more that we talk about it and the more that we make it create the understanding around head injuries and the long-term impacts that they can have, the better we are to deal with them when they happen. So, we've got independent match day doctors who will review any head knocks or things like that. Will are now allowed to pull players off the field without having to consult anybody. It's their decision. And I think that is so important because, now it's not up to the medical team. It's someone who literally sits independently and watches the footage and makes sure that, the player welfare or the welfare of the player in question is being looked after. And that's been a game changer, I think, for concussion. Not only diagnosing concussion, but actually being able to say, okay, he wasn't concussed, or he wasn't knocked out, or he didn't suffer a head injury. I think that's as important because players can miss a large block of time if they do get diagnosed with concussion when actually they may not have been concussed. So definitely the framework that's out there at the moment is more rigorous, and it's there for a reason, and it's there to protect the welfare of the players in the long term.
I'll come on to Richard on this topic in a moment's time, because how football is now dealing with it, especially the players becoming aware of it and actually thinking, well, do I want to be heading a ball and things like that in a moment, Richard. But Paul, obviously this is an issue that is relevant in cricket as well. Obviously we've had players lose their lives after being struck by the ball, and there's been changes in the helmet technology and all that sort of stuff. I mean, how often do you have players almost, I suppose, when you're a batsman, feeling like, what, I'm not into this anymore. I feel like I'm in danger. Does that ever come up? Do you ever because that's, I suppose, that's a mental well-being issue attached to potential physical damage that you might be facing. Does that ever manifest itself?
It certainly does in some of the bowlers. That they don't fancy it, I've got to say. They're one or two down the order that you see them give themselves a little bit of room and actually nearly standing on square leg umpire. So that does come into the game. But I've seen top order players, international players, that you go through a period of feeling a bit uncomfortable. You're not moving as quickly as you would. Your form's down, confidence goes, and it's judgment of length, which is the biggest challenge. So as a high quality batsman, judgment of length is the thing where they make the game look so much easier. They look like they're creating time and space themselves to be able to play the ball. And when you're out of nick and you're a bit rushed, that's when you feel as though you are in a little bit of danger. And you get that sort of half position where you're taking your head away from your hands. But actually, the best players, when they're playing well, their head and hands are working very close together. And you can see that very quickly in a batsman. So yes, it does happen. And we've all, as coaches, we've all worked with players with softer balls and even tennis balls, and actually got them back into the habit of the short ball, how they deal with it, how they cope with it. And some players have done it brilliantly. And I think that most players through their career will have had a period where they would have been nervous of being hit on the head. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And some cope with it a lot better. And as I say, some it's a very small window where it happens, but it definitely does happen. And then you get others who, in terms of, that there's almost that sort of macho bravery thing about batting with their helmet at times, and that's happened in the game in the past. But thankfully, that there are very few players now that do that. And in England, you have to wear, in first-class cricket, you have to wear a helmet, both as a batsman and as a wicket-keeper stood up to the stumps. All England players have to wear helmets when they're playing for England. There are concussion questions that they get set. They have to answer if they get hit on the head. They have to change their helmet every time they hit on the head these days. And we're in the same spot as Nick's mentioning there. It is down to the doctor. If the doctor says, they can't play, they can't play. If they have to come off, they come off. And we do have concussion subs now in international cricket, which is a great thing, much needed.
I realise what the time is, and we are sort of reaching our end game. But I will ask you one more question in a moment, just to sum up. But just finally to Richard on this topic, the fact that so much more information is now coming out in terms of head injuries and the possible impact later on in life linked to dementia, etc. Are you finding that players are asking more questions and that there is a bit more concern about heading the ball? I mean, because now I'm watching games and I'm thinking, do players actually, there's even been talk about banning heading from football. We know about it in younger people, but at the professional game as well. I mean, does the bravado and the sort of the bravery element, do we have to actually just put that on the side and maybe start to have these conversations properly?
I think we certainly need more research into it, Adam. Listening to Paul and Nick there, I think football is behind other sports, sadly. Yes, we need more funding towards head injury and the longer term effects of that. We have been asked more questions recently, is what I sense, on the back of the Jimenez injury for Wolves last week. What I would say as a pitch side medic is it's a real challenge when you run onto the pitch. And of course, if someone's unconscious, and obviously that can have implications for airway and also for their life in general. So yeah, we're obviously well trained and well versed into how to deal with those situations. The grey areas that lie in between someone being fully conscious and unconscious are the biggest areas of concern for me. So as Paul said there, as medics, we run on and we're asked certain questions we can ask the player in terms of time, space, orientation. There's certain motor tests we can do to look at their function. But I challenge anyone to deal with, like I had recently in one of my former jobs, a Korean player who spoke no English. So when you run onto the pitch, what do you do in that situation? Because you can't ask those questions. Even if you've got some kind of cards with translations on them, then the whole communication process breaks down. And yes, we lack neutrality in those situations. That player lying on the pitch is ultimately a patient for me, and we've got to make the best judgment call for that player. He's full of adrenaline. He wants to carry on. I think football's crying out for spotters in the crowd, somebody that's neutral that can help us. And I think in ice hockey in the States, they have a similar philosophy, but also a pitch side medic that helps us to make the decision. I think that's what we need to look at next. And I have worked in America, I worked in the MLS, and they take things far more seriously in soccer over there. And looking back at my time of West Ham, I think we've had one concussion where a player has missed 2 weeks of training and match play. In Canada and America, where I worked, we had 10 times that number in one season, and we had 2 players retire. And don't be wrong, those players were coming towards the end of their career, but it was just taken far more seriously over there in the States. And we've got a lot of catching up to do in English football. Yeah.
It's very interesting, and it is something that will be hopefully remains in a discussion and doesn't get forgotten about. Just a final point to all of you, for the attendees that are watching, and they've been very grateful to get all your pearls of wisdom so far. It might be something that you've mentioned already, but I just wanted to just sort of give you an opportunity to maybe pick out one thing, be it to do with physical or mental well-being, that maybe you've learned during this period of time, or it's something that you have always sort of reverted back to in terms of the way that you deal with looking after people. Is there anything in particular that sticks out for you? I mean, I can pick any one of you. If you start with you, Paul, that your sort of best practice when looking after people, I suppose, looking after the person rather than the player, I suppose.
Well, I think the thing that I've learned definitely over this last 8 or 9 months is actually listen to the answer and don't assume the answer you're going to get from the person you're speaking to. And Nick made that point earlier brilliantly about the fact that it's not just the players, it's about your coaching staff, your support staff, everybody else. And there are certain people in your organisation that they're always going to be, bouncing off the walls. They've always got something great to say. There's a bit of fun around them all the time. But even those people, make sure you listen to their answer, because sometimes it isn't what they say, it's what they don't say. And that's something that I've learned a lot in these last few months.
Yeah, fantastic. Nick?
I think that just off the back of the discussions that we've had, we've obviously got, I genuinely feel that we've got, world-class coaches, S&Cs, medical staff and support staff. But I think one of the most inspired decisions that Pat and Mark made was to employ a professional development manager who is taking Sam Jeffries, who's actually been to one of the PSN workshops, but he took over full-time as professional development manager, and it allowed us to understand more about how players were feeling away from rugby specifically, So we've had some really good feedback from players and their level of confidence about transitioning out of the game, financial security once they finish their careers, and what their careers will look like, post playing rugby. And I think if we can bridge that gap for them, it'll make their playing career a lot more fulfilled and accomplished in the fact that they feel confident in doing the best job that they can while they play, but then being able to transition out of the game successfully and start a career, after rugby and be able to support their families, etc. So It's definitely, for me, that's something that is hugely beneficial now, because we are being able to sort of change those 1 or 2% around not necessarily performance, but about how players feel mentally and what their careers will look like post rugby. And that, you know what, it starts with planning. When you become a professional rugby player, you don't have to start when you're at the back end of your career. The best time to start is when you're just starting your career. So yeah, that's been really important for us.
Nick, thank you very much. A final word to you, Richard.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I think for me, the main thing I've learned through this process is the kind of the adaptability, the versatility, and the resilience of people, of individuals, of teams, of organisations, and focusing on the latter there. It amazes me how a company like JCB or Dyson can put their mind to making ventilators when they need to do so. That reassures me that we've got some really good resourcefulness in the UK. This has been a really testing and trying time for everybody. But yeah, I've learned an awful lot from it. I think the communication channels are key. That was certainly something that we've looked at in terms of we allocated players to certain members of staff so we could follow up. But also, yeah, we shouldn't forget the staff. I always say, who treats the therapist, who treats the doctor? Because we at the time were being asked everyone thinks that we've got the answers. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Everyone thinks the medical staff have got the answers. Sometimes we haven't. And sometimes just being honest and putting your hand up and say, look, we don't know at this moment in time. We're working with you. We're trying to make this better. But yeah, I think we've all come through this, and hopefully we get through this sooner rather than later, and we're all far more robust and resilient. They're the key words for me, Adam.
Brilliant. Richard, Nick, Paul, thank you very much indeed. I think, you've been very open and honest today, and I think that's almost like a guiding principle, isn't it? In any conversation that you're having with players or staff or whatever, colleagues, is to try and be as open, as honest as you can, and try and come up with the answers together. So look, I really, really appreciate your time, but take care, everyone, and thank you very much for being part of this.